Lectionary is the lectionary we're following that gives us scriptures for each Sunday. And this year, in 2016, the Gospel series is from Mark, the Gospel of Mark. And so as I was looking at this passage, I couldn't think about what to call this story of the man coming through the roof. And it seems to me that there was a man coming down through the roof and a whole lot of love coming out through the roof. So this is a through the roof, both directions kind of story. And I hope we can kind of get to that point as we move through the story. The Gospel of Mark was actually the first written gospel. It's the earliest known gospel. When the Bible came together, they put Matthew first. But we've learned through studying the Gospels from many different perspectives that Mark was the first one, then Matthew and Luke, and then John was the last gospel. Mark, Matthew, and Luke are called synoptic gospels because they're all essentially based on the same group of sayings. That's the way a lot of things were passed on in Jesus' day. People would keep track of what he said and then write it down. So Mark took a source which is called Q, which stands for the German word Quelle, which means origin or source. And these sayings, and he put together his gospel, which is something of a narrative, but Mark tends to be very pithy and to the point. There's not a lot of elaborate stuff. So if you want to read a good short gospel, read Mark. We already learned during the Christmas season that the Christmas story is not there. That is in Matthew and Luke. Okay, Bible study. You've got that, right? Well, Mark tells this amazing story of the healing of a paralyzed man. And Jesus is at the beginning of his ministry. It's in Mark 2, so it's early in the story. Jesus is in Capernaum, which is his hometown, a fishing village. It's where he lives next to the Sea of Galilee. And he's trying, in some ways, to have a low profile. It doesn't seem to work for him. Every time he tries to get away, we read the crowds follow him. And we get these amazing stories about what happens. But Jesus is trying to just be at home, but everybody keeps coming and wanting to learn from him and to have him heal. So when the four friends carrying the paralyzed man on a stretcher arrive, they can't get in. So of course, what else would they do but go on the roof and cut a hole in the roof and put him down? Well, you need to know that cutting a hole in the roof in that house is not like cutting a hole in this roof, because the roof was rushes that were laid, branches that were laid over the roof. So it wasn't quite as difficult as jackhammering through the roof. It was clearing a hole and lowering the man down. But the interesting thing is that they were willing to do whatever it took for their friend. And I think this is a key piece of this story, that it wasn't just that the man needed healing, but that people were working for him. People were agents for him, helping him find the healing that he needed. The thing I want to focus on today is not so much the healing, but the cultural norms that Jesus broke in order for this to happen. The Jewish society at Jesus' time followed very specific rules, which are in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, which laid out the rules for living. And many of them were really good rules, like don't eat pork, because pork carries disease. So that makes some sense, don't eat pork. But some of the other rules don't make so much sense to us nowadays. And I think they didn't to Jesus either. The spirit of the law was about loving one another, even in the Hebrew Bible. All right? I'm here to break that opinion that the Hebrew Bible is just about an angry God. The basic tenet of Judaism is about loving your neighbor. That happens in the Hebrew Bible, which Jesus kind of lifted up. So, cultural norms are those things which society, it might be religion or political society, says, these are the boxes you need to live in. And if you go this way, it's bad. So follow us and be good. And part of the reason we have cultural norms is so that we can live together, right? Right? Yes. Okay. Y'all, are you there? Are you there? Yes. Part of the reason there are rules and ways that we live in society help us to get along with each other. But some of them don't seem to promote that. Some of them seem to be for other reasons. So there were two cultural norms that Jesus kind of overlooked in this event. Number one, people with illness or disability are considered unclean, and you may not touch them. If someone is ill or mentally unstable or disabled, they have to be cleansed at the temple. And Jesus, normal people couldn't touch people who were unclean. This is a very strict rule of Jesus. Also, only God, through religious leaders, can forgive sin. So when Jesus welcomed the man through the roof and touched him, he broke the first one. And when he said, "Your sins are forgiven," he broke the second one. And unfortunately, there were some, or maybe fortunately, there were some religious leaders there who called him up when he said, "Your sins are forgiven." He says, "Well, what should I just say? Get up and walk?" So he looked to the guy in the stretcher and said, "Get up and walk." And it worked. So Jesus was saying, some of these cultural norms aren't helpful if the basis of our religion is to love other people. We kind of have to figure out how we can do that. And sometimes that means standing up to what the norm is and pushing through it, through the roof, if you will. There is another interesting part of this passage, one that bothers me every time I read it, because I think of the way we've come to accept these words, the Son of Man. Jesus says in his interchange with the religious leaders, the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. This was part of his response to them. And I think many of us have, over the years, taken that to Son of Man to be Jesus. Just Jesus. But in this context, where Jesus is breaking cultural norms, I think he's saying people can forgive sins. There's much discussion about what these words mean, so I want you to know I'm not the authority. But it seems to me, in this case, it's a matter of saying, you all are empowered to forgive. It doesn't have to be just God. It doesn't have to be just a priest or a religious person. You all can do this. And we know later on with the disciples, Jesus said the same thing to them. You can do anything that I have done. So this saying, the Son of Man, seems to me to be, human beings can do this. A different way to think of that saying. Now, whatever it takes piece of this story, again, I think is two-pronged. That the friends of the paralyzed man were willing to do whatever it took to heal him. I think that spoke to Jesus, because it wasn't somebody selfishly saying, you need to heal me. It was a group effort saying, this guy really needs to be healed. And so they did whatever it took, and Jesus as well did whatever it took to move through that, to heal the man, to say, you are whole, you are a beloved child of God. This is something that we are all called to do. And I think it's something we forget. We like to say, Jesus was so special, we can't really do all the things he did. And that may be true, but I think we are called to do a lot of what he did, because he told us to do it. So this story for me is one that's both dramatic and very, very interesting. I love this sign, love unleashed, love that carries. This speaks not only of Jesus' love for the man, but for his friends' love for him. And it also says to me, what is my priority? When I find a tough situation around me, Is my priority abiding by the cultural norm? Or is it sometimes standing up to the powers that be saying, this is wrong? What is your priority? Where is it that you are able to do whatever it takes? What would it be that would get you to stand up and say, no, that's wrong? I think it's a question. I'm not asking for a specific answer now, but I hope you think about that during the week. How do you take that love that Jesus showed us into the world? And how can we be changed in order to make that love a reality? As you ponder that, I invite you to join as we sing our next song, Change My Heart. You may remain seated.